Welcome to Noon Wednesday. I'm Marissa Wojcik, multimedia journalist with Here and Now on PBS Wisconsin. Today is November 17. On average in Wisconsin, at least 20,000 people go without suitable housing nightly. As the cold winter months approach, lawmakers have continued to stall on funding initiatives to address the problem. Jill Volk, Executive Director of the Wisconsin Coalition Against Homelessness, joins me to discuss this. And Joe, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
So that estimate of 20,000, is that people in shelters, people in tents? Do we know exactly how many people are without homes?
Well, of course, trying to count the homeless is always a problem. At the federal level, of course, you have two different definitions and two different ways of accounting. So that 20,000 figure is something that the coalition has come up with as an estimate. And that includes people in shelters, people out on the street, and also people doubling up. So if you've got somebody that's living in the basement, let's say, of an apartment building because they have nothing else, nowhere else to stay, it would also include them.
Has homelessness increased during the pandemic, and has the pandemic changed who this population is?
Homelessness is absolutely, not only in Wisconsin, but frankly, nationwide. We're now looking at about a 15% increase. And during the pandemic, actually, everything stayed pretty stable. There was, and in most part because of the rent moratorium, because of the eviction moratorium. But that's now gone, has been gone now for about 2 months. And so I think one of the tests is that people are able to see a lot more people that are actually living outside, what we call unsheltered homelessness. In Madison is right now grappling with trying to move people out of parks that have been living in tents and to this alternative on the edge of town. Milwaukee has the same problem in terms of the Martin Luther King Park. I'm aware that La Crosse is trying to move people out of parks. So what you're seeing, and what you didn't see before in Wisconsin that much, was actually in encampments, reminiscence of the 1920s and 30s.
So this is often seen as an issue in bigger cities. You mentioned Madison, Milwaukee, La Crosse. But is this happening in cities across Wisconsin? Do we have an idea of how this exists across the state?
We do, and it does exist throughout the entire state. One of the ways that we know that, in terms of a data point, is that the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction keeps track of how many homeless students there are every year in the state of Wisconsin. Last year, they found that there were just north of 18,000 homeless kids during the year that were in school. Of course, that doesn't even count the kids that were not in school. But the point is that you can then look at the numbers of in all of the school districts throughout the state. And what you will then find is that nearly every district, 98% of the districts, had some homelessness, which means that all 72 counties in Wisconsin are experiencing this. In rural areas, it may not be as visible as 30, 40, 60 people living in tents in a park, but it's still there.
Do any federal pandemic dollars go towards addressing homelessness specifically?
Yes. For the most part, they've been in two areas. One was kind of a block grant approach that the feds gave to the states and counties. And that's what's been used to house people in local hotels. Part of the problem when the pandemic started, of course, is that most of your shelters are kind of a congregate kind of a site. Well, you can't social distance when you've got 70 people in an auditorium room sleeping next to each other. So the amount of shelter space that there was throughout the state kind of overnight just was like halved, if not more. And so the response was for cities and counties to rent hotel rooms, and that's happened all over the state. The other big one, which actually prevented a whole slew of people from being out on the street, is the federal rent assistance that's been going on now, is still going on, which allows people to get their back rent if they became unemployed because of the pandemic, which is pretty much everybody these days that is unemployed. So between those two things, the federal government did step in and try to soften the blow, and actually did a fairly good job.
Outside of the federal dollars, in the state of Wisconsin, this is a bipartisan issue. Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle have expressed interest in addressing homelessness and see it as a problem. But why does the legislature itself continue to struggle to pass policy initiatives or funding that will actually take action?
Yeah. Well, it's not even really the whole legislature. It's about 4 to 5 senators in the Wisconsin State Senate. We have a great champion in the Wisconsin Assembly. I mean, I should back up. We have a great champion in terms of the current governor, who in his budget had a huge step forward in terms of funding for homeless programs throughout the state. We have a great champion in Jim Steineke, who's the Republican majority leader in the state assembly, and he's been very active and was the author essentially of 8 bills in the last session, of which only one was passed by the Senate. If you look at past actions, the Steineke bills have passed the assembly on a 99-0 vote. But the Senate has refused to, the Senate leadership has actually refused to just put those bills on the floor of the Senate. And where I think they would have passed, they would have gotten enough votes. So it's really just 4 or 5 very conservative Republican senators in the Senate that is blocking initiatives from the governor and from the Republican-led assembly.
And in the assembly, legislation introduced last month would include pay-for-performance grants, as well as a provision that would criminalize and fine people who are homeless and camped on public property that has not been designated for that purpose. What is your opinion of those initiatives? Does it work to fine people who are in these encampments if it's not zoned or specifically designated for that purpose?
Yeah. Well, let me just say that was an ill-gotten idea, and in fact, the Assembly Republicans even figured that out because they pulled that before even voting for it. And then they had a number of other bills that would attempt to increase by incentivizing to investors the number of low-income housing units in the state. I think when you compare the governor's initiative, especially in the area of creating new low-income housing, to the assembly version, the governor's package would have certainly done much more. But besides the one bill that was not very well thought out in terms of trying to, criminalize essentially people being without a place to stay, it was at least another attempt by the assembly to even take up these issues when they, even though things get stymied in the Senate.
So can you describe some of the efforts that cities themselves or local communities are taking to really take action and address homelessness, and to really shelter people as we're approaching winter months. It's already starting to get cold, frost outside in the morning when I take my dog out. It's going to get colder. What is in the works to try and alleviate some of this pressure?
Well, fortunately, there's still funding from the federal government going to the state and the cities and the counties that many counties and cities throughout the state are going to continue to rent hotel rooms for people over the winter, and so that's going to continue. The rent, the eviction prevention program in the area of rent assistance, that is going to continue, so that people that do get behind in their rent will have a way to get that resolved. Cities are struggling in the area of these encampments that have sprung up due in large part the pandemic. As you may know, Madison, the city of Madison, has been struggling with a number of encampments and parks that they're now trying to, I'm not sure this is a very good idea, but they've actually bought a large parcel of land on the outskirts of town, and they're basically building 8 by 8 foot shelters where apparently the heat isn't going to be adequate for the winter. There's no sanitation, except you have to walk over to this other building. So you can imagine people, if it's 5 below and have to go to the bathroom, they have to walk to do that. I'm not sure that's a good solution, but it just shows where we've come. I mean, we're now talking about city sponsored encampments, and that's something that we certainly pre-pandemic would certainly not have seen.
There has been talk, for many years about tiny homes for the homeless, and it has never really taken off. Do you think that the visibility and people being able to actually see more of these encampments, do you think that is kind of forcing the issue? Does visibility create awareness to create action?
Well, I'm sure it does, and that, and people, parks tend to be next to neighborhoods, and what's probably creating, from a political point of view, in terms of making the city such as Madison do something, is that the neighborhood obviously is not very pleased about their park being turned into a homeless encampment. But with what the city's doing now with this development out on Dairy Drive, those aren't even tiny houses. I mean, these are literally 8 feet by 8 feet structures with a bed in them, and a heater that apparently can bring it 40 degrees higher than it is outside, with no toilet, no sink, and that's how they're going to. One could argue, is it, maybe it's better than a tent. Well, okay, fine, it's better than a tent, but certainly a government can do better than trying to house people for the winter in 8 by 8 shanties.
Where should the legislature put its efforts, and is this eventually going to just fall on cities and counties to really work with their own budgets and try and figure out solutions, or is there something that you believe the legislature should be focusing on?
Yeah, basically, one of the things that we found with all of the federal money around is that cities and counties and nonprofit providers, there's been money to move people into housing. The problem is that we found out that there's not enough housing, and so in the governor's budget, for instance, he had about $50 million in there to increase low-income housing throughout the state. And that's really where the legislature needs to be more forceful and involved, because even when we had these federal resources to get housing for people, I mean, it wasn't a question of the money. It wasn't a question that we couldn't come up with the rent and the deposit. We had all of that. There was just literally no low-income housing to be had. And so that's the challenge, I think, for the state to really resolve this problem.
Does this at all go beyond housing? Is this more than a housing issue, or is really the crux of it the fact that affordable housing is just not available, and that continues to squeeze people's budgets more and more and more, especially during these tough times?
Yeah, I mean, for instance, the Low Income Housing Coalition in DC does a state-by-state analysis of, how much it costs a family to live and how in a 2-bedroom apartment, and how long they have to work and how many jobs they have to work in terms of being able to do that. I mean, let's put it this way. There's a reason why if you're getting a mortgage, that the bank will only let you spend 30 to 35% of your income on housing, right? Because they know any more than that, you're at risk of not being able to make the payment. Well, in Wisconsin, we have 50% of the population paying 50, 60, 70, sometimes 80% of their rent for housing. So it should be no surprise then that the littlest thing, much less a pandemic, in these people's lives is going to cause them not to be able to pay the rent.
Eventually, these federal rental assistance dollars will run out. There's definitely plenty left. But, within a year or so, they will run out. Are we going to see more people falling off that cliff into homelessness?
Well, I think it's unclear, to be honest with you. It depends where we are to some extent in terms of the pandemic and the economy. I mean, the pandemic has upended everything, right? I mean, from jobs to healthcare to homelessness and all of these kinds of things. It would be a good thing to a certain extent if in a year and a half, let's say, when the rent assistance funds wind down, if we get back to pre-pandemic levels. Again, where we are right now, we have city-sponsored grapes of wrath, places where people are living, and that takes you back to the Great Depression in 1929. That's where we are now. Something good would be to get back to pre-pandemic levels where we didn't see that, at least.
All right, we need to leave it there. Jill Volk of the Wisconsin Coalition Against Homelessness, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
For more from Here and Now and PBS Wisconsin, you can visit pbswisconsin.org/news. And thank you so much for joining us on Noon Wednesday.